All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan McCoy, and I'm the co-director of the Center for Cybersecurity, and my side gig is a professor in the Department of Computer Science here at Tandon. And so I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 14th NYU Tandon Cybersecurity Lecture. We're thrilled to have you on the Brooklyn campus here. This particular lecture series is one of the longest running programs, along with our NYU Women Leaders in Cybersecurity program, which is coordinated by our own Judith, and she's going to be the moderator for today, and she's also a fellow in the Center for Cybersecurity as well. And the other long-running program that we have is the Seesaw program. And so this is a local involved event that has evolved into the largest student-run cybersecurity competition in the world. And I hope that everyone will come for that. That will be on November 7th, Seesaw 2024, and it will be here on the Brooklyn campus, and you would get to engage with a lot of our students and cybersecurity professionals as well. And so this cybersecurity lecture series has a long history. It began in 2011 with a generous grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to provide a public forum for discussing among scholars and practitioners with lectures and panels, basically highlighting the major risks and vulnerabilities in cybersecurity. And building on the success of those original lectures, AIG has undertaken sponsorship of this lecture series to continue the goal of assembling experts and interconnected disciplines necessary for comprehensive and collaborative discourse on cybersecurity threats. And at NYU here, we've been at the forefront of cybersecurity education for basically 2 decades. So we were actually one of the original universities to start granting degrees in cybersecurity. And today we have some major degree programs in the area of cybersecurity. One of our biggest is the NYU Masters, the Cyber Fellows program. And so this program is a really great value to people that are interested in getting a master's degree in cybersecurity. We offer a 75% scholarship discount off the tuition, and so this makes it basically the cheapest master's program from an elite private university in the US. And alongside our Cyber Fellows program, we also have a master's degree in cybersecurity risk and strategy. And so this is a 12-month cohort-based program jointly offered by the law school and Tandon. And then we also have our newest master's degree program. So this is the Master's in Emerging Technology, which we oftentimes call Build Your Own Master's Degree. And the idea of this program is that it's designed, with a unique curriculum where people can study across disciplines. And so they can choose different areas like machine learning and AI, user experience and design, wireless, cybersecurity, innovation and change management, robotics, data science, urban informatics, and software engineering. And they can take courses from these areas to build their own master's degree. So these are all big strengths at NYU Tandon, and students can combine these to get the master's degree that they want. And because we know that, there's a lot of talented people that have degrees in other areas, we have built what we call the Bridge to Tandon program. And so the idea behind this program is to train people with a bachelor's degree in another area and provide them with the basic skills so that they can succeed in a STEM master's degree or graduate program of their choosing. And we are also one of the few universities, one of the few handful of universities to have the distinction of having the triple distinction from the NSA. And so we have the distinction in education, research, and operations. And we're also designated as a Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence. And so with that backdrop, I would like to thank AIG again for their ongoing sponsorship of the Cyber Lecture Series and to introduce our keynote speaker. And so our keynote speaker today is Roshan Navagamawana, and he is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer of AIG. So he's responsible for leading AIG's global technology and cybersecurity strategy. He's responsible for managing core infrastructure, technology, and partnerships across processes and engineering efforts, and executing AIG's cloud strategy along with other technical innovations. And so with that, let me welcome Roshan.
Thank you, Damon, for the warm welcome. I am seriously considering that build your own master's degree. That sounds fun. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Thank you to NYU for having these sessions. I think they're great. We're delighted to be here on behalf of AIG. We're a longstanding member, as Damon said, of the NYU Tandon Advisory Council. And we're really excited to also today talk about public-private partnerships. Saying that 3 times fast will be really hard. But before we get to public-private partnerships, I also want to just kind of step back and acknowledge the partnership between AIG and NYU. And I think it's really powerful. And in addition to all the good things that Damon talked about, we appreciate the opportunity to be part of that advisory council. We think it's a great avenue to provide insight and feedback about what insights we see from the real world in cybersecurity, in our business, the trends as a company, and frankly, as part of our larger ecosystem. And we want to bring that to NYU in a way that's constructive, that can help craft programs that are more robust and relevant, and frankly, stand out amongst other institutions. So really happy to be part of that council. And just as important to me is the fact that we as AIG are then able to offer our colleagues access to NYU's world-class Cyber Fellows Master's program at a lower cost, right? We know that's an important part of what brings programs like this to the people that really aspire to a career in cybersecurity. So we appreciate that aspect of it as well. In fact, I think we have about 5 AIG colleagues who are currently enrolled in the program and over 15 who have earned their master's degree here already. And their impact is being felt at our company in a number of ways. And I'm going to just call out, 3 of them. They all have a lot of impact, but, 3 that came to mind. One is Israel Ramirez, who took advantage of the NYU Bridge program that was designed for students with without a technical education to build foundational skills before entering the master's program. And I think it's a great thing to have that bridge program. And Izzy currently is our senior engineer in the Cyber Range program, where we train and create attack simulations for our cyber defenders to hone their skills. So really critical part of our cyber practice. And we got 2 more folks, Omar Poya and Mayowa Labinjo, who were part of the program here, and they're now part of our cyber threat management practice. Threat intelligence and management practice. Really important work on the front lines of cybersecurity for our company. So, I think this program has a great impact. And I think that, armed with the insights from the Advisory Council, hopefully that makes the program robust and relevant and really grounded in what, the real world looks like when you enter into a company like AIG, right? And that's what we look for when we look for talent at AIG. We're looking for people with the initiative to pursue their ambition by building the necessary skills and experiences that helps us provide the capabilities and the services that our customers need, right? So we really rely on programs like this, and we hope that you see AIG in a similar light, that we want talent like you to come in and have the experiences that, Israel and the others that I talked about have, right? We really appreciate that. And I think last year you saw some of our talent and our expertise when Tracy Grella was here. She's the head of our global cybersecurity practice at the company. And she is a very passionate individual. She's the person that brings cybersecurity insurance practices to our customers, right? And that's a really big part of our business. And she's an expert in that field. And then the other part of it is internally within the company, I work with a lot of people who are part of what we think of as a cybersecurity team, because it is a team sport. And so one of the individuals that I'll just call out is Claude Wade, who's the head of our digital and data programs at the company. He earned his MBA from NYU. And between people like Tracy, who are externally facing, between people like Claude, who are internally facing, we all work together, right? And there's a lot of internal, external, public, private and ecosystem participation that you get to have when you're part of AIG's cyber community, right? And like I said, we think of this as a team sport, right? And how well we perform, right, is directly related to how well we collaborate. And these collaborative relationships, we believe, matter at every level. Working together, we can protect our collective interests, and we can deliver the outcomes that our stakeholders and our customers expect. The panel and everyone in the room are part of that ecosystem. We think that being part of this team sport is what will actually allow us to truly mitigate the threat of a very tenacious and unscrupulous foe, right? And I think working together is the key. It's not any individual, it's not any individual company, it's working together, right? And that's where I think that the public-private mission fits into this equation, right? And in my experience, I've worked with several of these agencies in the past, and I found them all very valuable. And today, I think it's more than valuable. I think it's essential. And I think these partnerships can help inform companies, guide our strategic thinking, as well as help us tactically defend and respond to these advanced persistent threats. As a Fortune 100 company, we deeply value these partnerships. Within AIG's information security program, we have a dedicated function that focuses on this relationship. It's led by Matt Gord, who's in the front row for us. And Matt, prior to joining AIG, spent about 20 years in law enforcement, and he knows firsthand the importance of these relationships. Matt helps us partner with several government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. As part of the financial services sector, we also partner with the U.S. Treasury through sector-specific organizations like the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council, the Analysis and Resiliency Center for Systemic Risk. So, and those are just two. I couldn't name off all the other ones. Matt has a lot of entities that he engages with every day. And we think that's really important to engage broadly like that. We also think it's very important to engage deeply, right? So for example, Matt is the co-chair for the Financial Services Sector Policy Committee. And that's a role that represents the financial sector on policies and initiatives related to national security and enabling better public-private collaboration. That committee helped craft what you see today as the National Security Memorandum 22, which empowers CISA and directs the U.S. intelligence community to more closely engage with government agencies and private owners and operators of critical infrastructure who are recognized as, and I quote, often our first line of defense against adversaries who target the nation's most critical assets. Tonight, we're going to hear from this community of companies, government partners, and thought leaders as we engage to respond to the global threat. We'll hear about some of their experiences with these partnerships and what it takes to maintain them. I'm looking forward to an engaging conversation and a lively Q&A. Please welcome our moderator, Judy Germano.
Honored to be here. I joined NYU in 2013 after 11 years as a federal prosecutor. And my primary topic when I started was public-private partnerships. So part of what I'd like to do, I said 12 and a half years ago, I'm losing, my math is struggling, more than a decade ago, let's say. But public-private partnerships was the topic. And part of what I'm excited to talk about with these amazing panelists today is how has it changed? How has it remained the same? How can we do it better? Why are we still talking about it? Because it's important. So if I may invite my amazing panelists up to join us, and we'll all sit and have a chat. So, is this working? Rather than me going on with a long list of amazing accolades that we could do and are well-deserved, I'm going to ask each of my panelists to introduce yourselves, how you come to this topic. Anne, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I look forward to being here tonight, so thank you for having me. I'm Anne Barron-DiCamello. I am the global head for cybersecurity operations at Citi. What does that mean? It means that anything that has to do with the pointing of the sphere of cyber is going to be part of my team. 24/7 operations. We run teams here in the United States as well as in Singapore. I actually have team members in 26 different countries. So a very global perspective associated with how we've approached cyber. Everything from hunting forensics to insider threat issues associated with anything that would come in within the umbrella of defense, blue team kind of defenders. On the other side of the house, I have all the finders. So red teams, vulnerability assessments, pen testing. 150 ethical hackers are part of my organization. So it's really fun to see what they come up with. They find ODAs and common operating systems and tools that we operate, as well as looking at our own applications. We have 8,000 applications, and I want to say 20,000 developers. And so there's lots of applications internally that are developed by Citi. And so they have an opportunity to really find those and get ahead of the vulnerabilities that can be introduced into the code into production. And in the center of that is what we call our fusion centers. And so this is kind of the purple team. The finders are kind of the red teams, and then the purple teams are the synergy between the two. And that's where we have our intelligence teams, our threat management teams, our exercise teams. We just held an exercise with Jane, our CEO, and her direct reports just last week. The importance of exercising for a really bad day and making sure you don't just have a playbook on the shelf, but you actually leverage that. So all of these teams collectively make up operations. We work closely with the business, and we work really closely with our partners and our peers in industry. I was previously the board chair for FSISAC, so I had a great opportunity to work with partners like Matt and others. And prior to my time at Citi, I ran a similar organization at Amex. And then prior to that, I spent the first 20 plus years of my career in national security. I ran the US CERT, which is the operational arm for CISA. And spent some time in Department of Defense up at NSA. So looking forward to the conversation today. I'm looking forward to some lively Q&A as well. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I'm Kelly Hepburn. I am part of Roshan's team. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I've been at AIG for almost a year. I run identity and access management. So anything access related, privileged access, advanced authentication, the identity governance world, that's me. Before that, I was at Transamerica. Before that, I was at Western Union and have past experiences as well at large banks. So I've done this for quite some time, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Joe?
Thanks, Judy. So I'm Joe Lawler. I am a supervisory special agent out of the FBI in New York. At my core, I'm a hacker. Don't worry, I've admitted all the things I've done on my polygraph, so I'm clear. I run one of the operational squads here out of the New York field office. We'll probably get into that a little bit more in the future, but I've been with the FBI for 15 years, worked cyber my entire career. I've also worked in the private sector as a managing director of a proactive cyber defense practice, which is a mouthful, but ultimately what we did was risk assessments and regulatory risk assessments, pen tests, and that sort of thing. In the FBI, of course, we investigate all sorts of cyber crimes committed by all sorts of adversaries, which again, we'll get into as well. My team has sort of a critical mass of technical talent. So we tend to go after the more technically advanced adversaries. I run a task force. So it is a combination of not only the FBI, but we also have over a dozen partners, both local, state, and other federal law enforcement that works with us as well. I also did a 3.5-year stint out of a headquarters unit called the Global Operations and Targeting Unit. And in that job role, my responsibility was actually to work here at an office in One Penn Plaza with an organization called the National Cyber and Forensics and Training Alliance, the NCFTA, which is a nonprofit organization. And you can think of it simply as like a fusion center. It's where private sector and government can come together to actively share threat intelligence, specifically on cyber, but also some other things as well. So I've had the opportunity to kind of sit in that space as well. So again, looking forward to a great discussion today and hopefully some good Q&A.
Thank you, Joe. Justin?
I'm Justin Kapos. I'm a professor here at NYU Tandon. I've built a lot of widely used software, especially in the software supply chain space, and had a lot of influence there. So most Linux package managers use a design that I created during my dissertation work. I also created projects like Tough and Intoto, which are very, very common in the software supply chain space. I do, I also did like along with my students, we did the signing model that Git uses to do tag signing and stuff like that. So if you're signing things in Git as you should be doing, then you're using that design and software. I work a lot with open source foundations, especially the Linux Foundation. I literally wrote the book that the cloud native part of the Linux Foundation uses to do security assessments of projects, and I run that process for them. I'm also on the governing board of the OpenSSF, which is an organization that is responsible for putting out a lot of the guidance and also producing a lot of the tools that help to secure the software supply chain.
Thank you. So as we talk about public-private partnerships in cybersecurity, I'd like to just spend a moment or a few moments level setting on what do we have to worry about and partner on these days. So Joe, if you could just give us a little bit of current day threat landscape.
Sure. What don't we have to worry about, right? That would be a shorter conversation. So again, we as the FBI, we look at obviously a myriad threats, everything ranging from simple sort of what we call script kiddies, young kids that are, just copying, pasting things, testing things like I was doing when I was 10, all the way up to very sophisticated nation state threat actors whose job it is from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock to hack your organization. To give you some numbers, we have a website called ic3.gov. It's our Internet Cybercrime Complaint Center. And this is sort of our official webpage where people can go and make reports to the FBI directly about the cyber incidents that they've incurred in their organizations. Last year, 2023, we received over 880,000 reports over the year, which was about a 10% year-over-year increase from the previous year. Those 880,000 reports, the total sum of the losses from those 880,000 reports accumulate to about $12.5 billion in losses. Now, what I want to caveat all of this with is this is what's reported to the FBI. We're under no illusion that everything is reported to us, although potentially new regulations have improved that. But we suspect that there's a large portion of these sort of attacks that we don't ever see. The biggest threats from a financial standpoint are what we call pig butchering. That accounts for about $4 billion in 2023. And then business email compromises. These are cyber-enabled sort of fraud schemes, right? Not highly sophisticated. And these are things essentially that are targeting people, individuals, using sophisticated social engineering techniques. And one of the things that we are really focused on and that we really need to partner on is the emergence of technologies that enable or more sophisticated attacks in the social engineering space. Artificial intelligence, right? That's the buzzword of the day, but that is something that we really need to work together on. From a more destructive standpoint, looking at malware and that sort of thing, ransomware still is a tremendous problem, especially as it pertains to critical infrastructure. We have foreign nation state threat actors who are deploying ransomware, and we have sophisticated criminal organizations that are deploying ransomware. So that is a big problem that we need to clearly partner with. And I would also say we're seeing the threat evolve. So, when it comes down to it, there's only two ways to get into a system, right? You either have credentials or you take advantage of a vulnerability or a misconfiguration. That's it. There's no big complexity to it. So the social engineering aspect, the training of your employees is absolutely critical. The asset management, the vulnerability management is absolutely paramount as well. So that is a key place and where we're at with the NCFTA and with partnerships like this, things that we need to focus on. Of course, we always have nation state actors and sophisticated actors that are deploying 0 days and that sort of thing. But I can tell you that the vast majority of the attacks that we see come from social engineering and taking advantage of misconfigurations and vulnerabilities.
Kelly, Roshan did a great job starting us off in terms of the importance of public-private partnerships. If we could just pick up from there, what do you see as how they work the best or the key ways to think about partnering in cybersecurity?
The identity and access hat on, having those partnerships are key. To Joe's point, we see most of the threats coming from, or not most of, many of the threats coming from credential or bad credentials. So if you don't have those secured properly, people are getting in there. If you don't have the partnerships with the government to come in and help you in distress, and they're on the outside looking into the problem, and you're not partnering on how to fix the problem moving forward, it can become a much bigger problem, because if they're not there in with you doing the work to get you where you need to go, becomes a much bigger headache.
And I just want to pick up, Joe mentioned the IC3. So after I left government and called for a client who had a cybersecurity attack, one of my dear friends said, well, you have to go on this website and fill out this form. And I said, what? You're telling me I have to go fill out a form? I'm calling you for help. I have a client in crisis. And he said, trust me, Judy, it actually works. And I want to say it actually works. IC3.gov, you should know what it is, you should use it. And I have even gotten calls from agents across the country who said, I'm putting in this other investigation. We found this person, and it goes back to a prior report that you did. And sometimes it's when you need immediate access or long-term access. So it's not just a form. It's not just your government form, but on the private sector, and you have been a leader in this field for years and years. I was very excited that I would get to see you again tonight. It's been too long. What do you see as in terms of the private sector? So years ago, when I started on this topic, the two biggest issues that I saw, or hurdles to public-private collaboration, were trust and benefits. Private sector companies saying, well, I don't want to give all our business and information and vulnerabilities to the FBI, then maybe we have more problems. And benefits, not really understanding or appreciating how important or helpful it can be to call. Are those still hurdles, or are there new hurdles, or how do we overcome whatever you think the hurdles are today?
All of the above, probably. In certain areas, I think organizations like the ISAC, so Information for Sharing Analysis Centers, FSISAC is a really strong one. Actually, we're celebrating our 25th year this year, which is tremendous history in this space to have an organization that's been primarily focused on information sharing across peers, working with government, working in a global fashion. It's over 5,000 members. And so I think there's a lot of progress that's been made with FSISAC helping kind of be the stalwart for others to emulate in this space. But it comes back to what you said, as part of the 25th anniversary, I was the former chair. So they asked me, what do I think about where FSISAC is today and where it's going, and like a word that I would use to describe FSISAC. And I used trust because it is fundamentally important. I think I've seen some government efforts stall because there's a lack of validation and verification of information sharing. If I'm going to take information from a peer, I need to know who it is. I need to know what's their credentials, like what is their abilities. Do I trust this source? Is this someone that's going to put junk into my system? And so I think having vetted communities like the ISACs can really help with the acceleration of the data that you receive. And so I think there's been a lot of communities of interest that have come up to kind of help ensure that there's that trust first, that you are a verified source, that you are someone that I think is valid, and the things that you're going to give me are going to be helpful to me. So I think the trust is still important. Certain communities are learning about that and adopting those standards in order to have that information sharing. The benefit is, because I have that trusted information sharing community, the benefit is your detection can become my response. And so I think we're seeing more and more of that, where I'll learn from a peer about a campaign just recently where North Koreans were leveraging LinkedIn to try to have applications into jobs that were part of city. we learned from someone else and we got those IOCs, indicators of compromise, and we leveraged that in our network to see, oh yes, we've seen some people apply for jobs that had those credentials. And so it was a really great way to benefit from someone else through the information sharing that's done every day, multiple times a day throughout the year, 24/7. So it's a journey, I think. I think certain industries are getting better at it and learning from others. I'm actually, we're also members of the NDISAC, which is the Defense Industrial Base. And so benefiting in that community, what I've learned from FSISAC has also been really helpful to try to help spur the growth of what they're doing. They're a heavily targeted industry, as you can imagine. Different threat actors care about defense industrial base than finance, but there's a lot of overlap. And so how can we collectively help with that and bring them all forward? But it's a journey and we're not quite there. There's still opportunities specifically to better partner. And this is great forums where we can hear from others about how they're doing it and benefit that way in our own organization.
Justin, when we talk about public-private partnerships, we're missing, well, what about academia? And sometimes people say, oh, that's ivory tower, but the work that you're doing is very much boots on the ground and impacting both the public sector and the private sector. Tell us a little bit about how does that happen? How do you get started? And how is the work that you're doing being applied?
Sure. And for this, I'll kind of put my like Linux Foundation, I don't know, leadership's the wrong term for it, but like that hat on for a moment here. And open source is such a big part of the software footprint. It's over 80% of the lines of code that are out there and the things you're using are open source. And it's over 95% of the software you're using has open source in it. So it's absolutely everywhere. And it's absolutely critical to protect against it. And it's important that things flow not just between private entities that have this trust, but flow out to these open source communities, which is also a big problem because who's in these open source communities? Well, there's someone who has some GitHub username that looks like just a keyboard dump, who's our third biggest contributor to a project. And as we've worked with them for years, we met them at a conference. We don't know their real name, but their code's always been high quality. They review things, they obey the community standards, and now they're going to be a maintainer with a commit bit to this project that's used by lots and lots of people. That's just how open source works in general. And so I think there are definitely some challenges with that. And I'd like to hear, from my other panelists, like what they think the right relationships are, because there is an absolutely massive corporate presence in open source, but it's not pervasive and it's not in all the right places. And I think there are definitely ways that we could partner better.
Sounds like these are some people we'd love to talk to.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a great way, yes, a very productive way. No, I mean, this is a great point, right? And I think we've even seen some attack vectors from update software, servers and that sort of thing, where people have compromised source code, and that it's a big problem, right? And there's so much of the internet and critical infrastructure runs on this code that Justin's describing. 85% roughly of critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector, right? And it's part of the charge of the federal government is to ensure the protection of that. We don't have the resources, unfortunately, to like review every line of code, but it is absolutely paramount that we have connections with people who are doing these commits, who are doing the reviewing. Not that we want to keep tabs on people or run all kinds of background investigations on people and that sort of thing. It's just that, again, the faster we can get information, the quicker we can action it, right? Back to your point, Judy, about IC3, there's basically a rule of thirds here, where if you contact the FBI within 24 hours of having a financial loss from a business email compromise, there is a very good chance that we can get that money back for you. For every day that passes, that drops down by a third. So 48 hours, maybe you got like a 50-50 shot, so even more than a third, maybe 3 days, and that money is gone, right? So actionable information requires very solid and continuous relationships and conversations, right? So critical.
And I would just add, I'm sure you know John Meadows. He served on the board for OSSF. I just was looking through my notes because I know he's heavily involved in both that as well as PHINOS. And you're right, corporate engagement is critically important in that. The supply chain aspects, I think you mentioned that, but my mind goes back to solar winds. It goes to so many things that we're seeing and the concerns that we have. And it is a community effort to be engaged in how we collectively are going to address this. I think there's a number of guidance that's being put out. PHINOS has been a great resource for working with private industry tech firms as well as corporate entities to come together and help us understand what are the standards for ingestion of code from these open source repositories. What is the poisoning that happens in them? So ingestion means that we're going to scan that and have the capabilities to make sure that anything we're ingesting, anything we're sharing is being scanned both ways for the protection of the communities. And I think that it requires investment. And so, how do we help some of the firms that don't have that investment at the ready? And so I think there's a lot of collective mechanisms we can do there as well. But it's critically important for organizations that have the funding and the resources and the talent to be engaged in these to kind of help bring some of the levels up, I think, as well.
So for an organization that wants to, I'm going to phrase this terribly, wants to do public-private collaboration, where do you even start? How do you know? There's been a lot of different acronyms already thrown out about FSISEC and the other different ISACs and SSF and OFS. I'm going to mess it all up. Right. So how do you know to parse through this soup of opportunity, other than call Joe at the FBI if you have a problem? But Kelly, what are your thoughts and guidance for our audience?
I mean, if you aren't already, you're saying, where do I go? What do I do? Your current partners, your current vendors that you already work with, what are they doing? How are they solving their problems? The problems that you have, 80 other people have. So using the resources that you have, the vendors, the tool vendors, as well as third-party vendors, just to say, how are other problems being solved? What are other people doing? And they'll lead you to all of these 3, 4, 5-letter acronym things to be able to get you to where you want to go and ask a lot of questions.
It's a great point about looking at what your vendors and partners are doing. I'll also mention you might want to look at what your peer organizations or your competition is doing as well. Other thoughts from our panelists on how to figure it all out and get started?
I actually had a colleague, she's I would say a junior analyst, reach out to me just today, and she was thinking about her next career move and what that would look like. She's been at Citi for, I think she said 2+ years. And she was trying to figure out, do I go for promotion or do I go and get my PhD? And I said, well, those are two different things, two different options. And sometimes you can do them both simultaneously. I was giving her the benefit of the PhD, going back to school and finishing that. I think that's a great way to create a network as well. And sometimes I think we forget that a lot of the networks that I've developed throughout my career started with my graduate program and the connections I made there, both to the academic community, but as well as to government partners, as well as to vendors that I still keep in touch with. So I think there's a really important part of thinking about where does your network come from? And it can come from a lot of these aspects that you are part of throughout your career. So building that network and then continuing to bring others along with you, I think is so important. Even being here tonight, we haven't seen each other in years, but it's wonderful to have a recognized face and then know that, if there's a resource issue or an issue at all or any kind of concern, that you can reach back to those folks and they will help support you in a time of need.
And you can send your colleague to the Masters in Cybersecurity Risk and Strategy at IBM. And we have some at NYU, we'll help you out. We have some wonderful students in the audience. Gratuitous commercial interview. That was not scripted. I apologize. So Justin, what do you think in terms of from the academics in the room, what guidance do you have for students and others who want to get involved and figure out how to bridge this gap from academia to collaborating with some of our panelists or people in those positions?
Well, I can't necessarily tell you what will work for you, but I can tell you what worked for me. And what worked for me is to actually care about that more than anything else. Care about having real world impact. Care about actually putting my finger on the scale of something that moves something in the real world, right? I think that there's this, I will say, I feel it's a fallacy, this view that there's this chasm between academic work and industrial adoption that just needs a little bit of funding to bridge and smooth it over. I think a lot of academic work is like in a whole other planet, or maybe even a whole other universe with a whole other laws of physics, okay? Because they fundamentally don't understand practice. It's built on ideas that are cool ideas to explore, but can't actually be applied in the real world. So I would encourage you to get to know and work with these communities and work with people who have these actual problems. One thing I would not encourage you to necessarily do is go to someone and say, hey, what problem do you have for me to solve? Because a lot of times the people in industry or in government or elsewhere that deal with this are like swimming in this deluge of things, and they're kind of treading water and doing their best with what they have. And what you're looking for is you're often looking for things that are kind of the paper cut that everybody has that nobody's really realized they have. Or you're looking for the place where you can kind of put the lever in and put enough pressure to move the boulder in a way. And you can be risky with that if you're in academia. And sometimes it pays off huge, and sometimes it ends up being nothing and you spend 3 years. But in the end, if you take a couple shots at this, you'll have some fantastic success. One last thing I'll say about this is that a lot of the open source communities I work with, people are very scared. Like, how do I get involved? What do I do? I don't know how to do things. Show up. Show up to conferences. Show up to community meetings. They're all listed publicly. You can just go and sign in. At the beginning, they'll say, hey, anybody want to say hi? Say, hey, I'm so-and-so from this university or this company, and I'm just here to try to learn. Go to a few of those meetings. Find a community that's doing something that interests you. Offer to, chop wood, carry water. Offer to, hey, I'll take this document and make a pass over it and, add some thoughts here and there and fix the grammar and stuff like that. I'll do this, I'll do that. And before you know it, you're going to be like helping to author really important standards that are used throughout industry. So that's just a great way to work your way in.
Really quick, a way to get involved directly with the FBI from an individual standpoint even is an organization we call InfraGard. As a citizen, you can apply to, and I don't even know if you have to be a citizen, but as someone who's working here in the United States, you can look up your local FBI chapter of InfraGard, put in an application. It's an open community. Once you've got a very light vetting through the application process, and you're invited to meetings like this that are just for InfraGard members. We always have FBI agents and others. I have a CISA person on my task force that has done presentations. So, Treasury was mentioned before. There's all kinds of different agents from different federal agencies that give presentations and hand out business cards and that sort of a thing. So from an individual standpoint, that's it. And for my executives in the room, we also have what's called the CISO Academy for Chief Information Security Officers, or people who are sort of at an executive level in cybersecurity, where we send you down to Quantico, Virginia, where all of us go to our essentially like agent boot camp. I had to go for 6 months, but you only have to go for a week. And we do all kinds of really cool things with you. We take you to the range, we take you to the Hogan's Alley and show you all that stuff. But we also do some very serious networking discussions, case presentations, discussions about information sharing. And it's an opportunity for you as well as an executive to provide the FBI incredibly valuable feedback on how we can get better at what we're doing.
I would just make a plug. Next month, October, I think it's 7th, 8th, 9th in Philadelphia, there is the Grace Hopper Conference. 25,000 technologists come together. It's a great way to network. It's only a 90-minute, hour plus on the Acela, if you can do that. I highly recommend. I've gone for years and years. When I was at Amex, it was a great way to recruit. It was also a great way to network. Amazing presentations by a lot of diverse folks within our community. So it's a great way to come together with other diverse candidates or other diverse colleagues, because it is a lot of times, I think it's heavily female. So it's a great way to meet folks from around the world. But again, 20 to 25,000 folks come together for that conference. And I think there's a lot of organizations, universities sponsor you. I know we're sending, I think 37 engineers from Citi are attending. I'm the executive co-sponsors for that. So I'm very excited to participate. It's a great way for us to engage as well as for us to create that network.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you.
Just never stop asking questions. People that are in this industry are usually really passionate people about what they're doing. So always ask the questions, don't stop. Always want to continue to learn.
And I'll do one last shameless plug here for Seesaw, even though we heard a little bit about it before. It is an absolutely fantastic event to go to. You'll see some of the top talent in the world here at the high school level, at the undergraduate level, graduate level. You'll see all kinds of fantastic research. We bring them all out here. They'll be doing competitions and things like that you can benefit from. And of course, that means that we have lots and lots of vendors and lots of other people here who want to come and meet all this great talent and interact with it. So especially for those of you who are local and here, do not miss out on Seesaw, which is from November 6th through 9th. Some of it will be right here.
So Justin, are your shoes white hat, black hat, hacker? Like, it depends which ones you're wearing. Are you
Yes.
hedging today?
It's like whichever foot I want to put forward is.
So back to a question, Joe, that I asked Anne about trust and benefits in public-private collaboration. Do you think government's getting it? Not you, but hypothetically.
I'm
do you
crushing it,
think-
yeah.
Is there, how can it be done better? What are some of the obstacles and where is it working well? Just to give you the second part, a little softball, but the real question is,
Yeah.
where can it be better?
So data, right? Data is such an issue. Your networks are so unbelievably complex, right? And the amount of data that goes through your networks, not even the stuff that's resident on the systems themselves, but the data that traverses the network is incredible. Like, gone are the days where I show up at a company and I'm like, hey, give me all your network logs and I'll put those into evidence and scrub those for IP addresses. I mean, like that's not a thing anymore, right? So, and Anne made a great point earlier where it's like, are you giving me garbage that's going to suck up resources and take up time, and you're going to be chasing after ghosts or information that's old? IP addresses, attack infrastructure changes so unbelievably fast. The sophisticated adversaries are using combinations of compromised infrastructure, procured infrastructure, residential infrastructure, corporate infrastructure. So really the challenge for us, and I think when I say us, it's not just the federal government, it's everybody in this, one team, one fight thing, is the fidelity of the data that we are collecting and exchanging. I think where we have to get better is identifying the critical places where we can obtain that good data. I think one of the things that's working really well is our internal partnerships within the federal government. I think over the years, we have gotten better and better and better at sharing information among our internal partners. And then simultaneously in a separate thread, we've also become much, much better and much more open in what we share across to the private sector. And a lot of that information that used to be stovepiped in very secret organizations within the government now has channels that it can pass through to get directly to the people who need to see that information. So, I think, again, the challenges remain fidelity of data. We have to figure out how we get better at that, how we share information with the private sector in a timely fashion so that, it's not a month late, it's not 2 months late, it's not even days late. It's got to be as quickly as possible. And how the mechanisms and the trust and relationships, so that when I go and give Anne and her team some indicators of compromise, their lawyers are already okay with her giving us some data back. And I think that trust comes from, I know it's super cliche, but let's exchange business cards before bad things happen, right? The FBI is trying not to be just reactive. And I can say that for the federal government as a whole. We're not trying to be reactive. Reactive means you're too late. We're trying to be proactive. So let's exchange information beforehand so that we can have those conversations between our lawyers, your lawyers, all the stakeholders, get all that stuff in place, understand expectations clearly about what it is that we're looking for, how we can share information. We can understand the complexities of your hybrid environments, and you can understand the capabilities of the federal government, so that as we come across information that may key us into situations that you should be aware of, we can pass that information to you, and then you can do some investigation into that data, provide us some information seamlessly back, and so on and so forth.
So as we talk about data, that means now I have to ask you about AI and machine learning and how current technologies now available can and should be better utilized to help make this information sharing faster, better, more efficient. Kelly, any thoughts on how we can leverage technologies and innovate public-private partnerships for greater results?
One of the first things I thought of was when you were saying what technologies coming from the identity space, passwordless, people social engineer into help desks. Well, if you don't have help desks resetting passwords for the company, you have self-service or passwordless, both. It cuts out the threat a little bit more. So that's kind of where my brain went when you asked that question, like what kind of technologies are out there? I've seen that progression happen for sure.
I would just say zero trust technology or zero trust kind of architectures. I think it's a bit of a buzzword, but it's also the concept behind it. We assumed breach, we assume you have a breach network. Any kind of credentials we assume could be compromised. And so having that kind of approach means you're going to be much more suspect associated with that. You're also going to have time to live tokens. You're going to really prioritize any kind of privileged access. You're going to have personas associated with that. So back to the identity thing, I think if you have kind of a assumed breach type mentality, that just adds a number of layers associated with any kind of authentication. There's some interesting rules that are coming out from the government as well. CSPB 1033, and it's basically going to make financial institutions, this rule is passing, and it'll make us provide access to customer data that's never been provided to customers. It's not just Citi, but all financial institutions in the US. How can we do that securely? We have to be better at authenticating our customers. We have to have even less trust, but also provide better access. And so I think the technologies that are going to be called upon for us to do that successfully are going to really require a binding between identity and security operations centers to help that, with addition of fraud. They're the key components. They own all of AML, know your customer. And so that is going to be an interesting triage of bringing groups together to solve a problem, not so much a problem, but an access issue that previously we weren't able to provide, but now we're going to be mandated based on new rules that are coming out of those organizations. So interesting times ahead, but it'll come up with a lot of great capabilities, because if we can solve it for customer access, we can solve it in other things.
What she said, yes.
Ask for questions from the audience. So I have more and I can keep going, but if our audience wants to ask questions, I think we have people with microphones there, or I'll just keep asking the questions I want to.
I actually have a question.
Yes.
I want to know, how often are you guys an afterthought? Like, if it's a big enough issue, you're there, you're partnering, you're right in there helping the public sector. But how often is it, we don't need them yet, we don't need them yet, we don't need them, oh no, we need them?
Oh no, we needed them last week.
Right, yes.
Unfortunately, it's all too common. In my experience over the last 15 years, I've been a primary incident responder for the New York office. And the New York office, as you can imagine, our customer base here in Manhattan is pretty sophisticated and pretty complex. And I would say all too often it is the case where there's a lot of hesitancy to bring in federal law enforcement and the FBI for fear of losing control of the situation and losing control of your own data, right? You're afraid that by inviting us in, now you can't limit what we see, what we take, what we do with that information, who we share it with. That is a myth. That should not be a fear in your minds. When we come, we are not in the business of re-victimizing organizations, right? when you are a victim of a cyber breach incident, material event, I think is what we're calling them now. Our job is to go interview you and collect forensic evidence of a crime so that we can make attribution and impose risk and consequences on the adversary. We're not regulators. We don't scour your systems for other violations of law. So I would love to say that that message has been clearly articulated and understood, but I don't think we're there yet. I think that like I said before, it's still remains to be all too common where we're not called right away. And it's heartbreaking. Like when I go to an organization and they've suffered, simple thing like a BEC, like I said before, $2.5 billion in losses reported to the FBI last year for business email compromises. When an organization, calls us and says they've lost $5 or $6 or $7 million from a BEC, and that's going to cause them to close their business. And I have to tell them, like, if you had called me 3 days ago, we could have actually done something about this. Now it's going to be part of an investigation, and we're going to hopefully go after this adversary, get hands on this adversary. Hopefully the adversary hasn't laundered this money to an extent where we can't get any restitution for you, right? It becomes a challenge. So if we could get to that place where everybody trusts us, I got a nice smile, right? Like, you're a trustworthy guy. That would be fantastic.
There's a question.
We have questions?
Hi, how big of a concern is quantum computing in terms of, the power behind that in terms of hacking and getting into systems?
So maybe I'll start with this. So I think given what is currently deployed widely today, it's a major concern, but it seems like the actual technology is a little ways off. Fortunately, NIST and a lot of others have been paying attention to this. And so recently they've published 3 quantum computing standards. I'm not as good with all the numbers, so I can't rattle them off, but they've recently gone and had Sphinx Plus and a few other algorithms be standardized through there. There are already systems, like for instance, the tough system I mentioned before, that's something that they developed along with others that's used fairly widely in the cloud and other ecosystems, already include support for this. So it's up to the people who are running the system to turn that on. But once they turn that hash algorithm on, then you can be relatively protected in situations like that. I think that we'll start to see a lot of movement from, at least I hope we'll see a lot of movement from industries like automotive and medical devices that produce hardware that might sit out there for a long period of time. I hope that they'll be very, very early adopters because they don't want their silicon and things like that to be out there and have algorithms they can't use in it and an inability to push software updates down to them and stuff like this for this. But I think as we see people move over to post-quantum algorithms, a lot of the space will be a lot more secure. We'll be back to closer of what we have today, which is an assumption that our cryptography is mostly good.
We met with the 2 developers of the new FIPS standards that came out in August. And just last week, I was in DC talking to them, and they actually started with a mandate for all federal government, including military, to be to the new PQC algorithms by 2035. That's a long road. Like, that is the mandated date. They have to be there. But a lot of us are backing into that, getting there much quicker to the point, because there's the algorithms are broken across all the different infrastructure applications, everything you can think about associated with that. There's some that are still going to need some industry engagement. There's actually a group of 40 entities that come together. I think it's called PQC Congress. And this is a public-private opportunity for thought leaders in the space to come together and share the stories about how they're transitioning to the new PQC standards as well. So again, another great place for industry and public and private organizations to come together collectively, share how they're on that journey, what they're doing, work with vendors, work with other companies, but it's a collective effort to get there.
Oh, and one last point is that the Linux Foundation has a new foundation under it that is actually producing open source, heavily reviewed implementations of these that are easy for people to drop in. You don't need to go read the spec and write your own code. Please don't.
Hi, Frank here. A question about companies that are also SEC regulated working with the federal government. If a company wants to be proactive and work with the government, work with the FBI to find things in advance, what if that means having to reveal less than stellar configurations in their networks? That could just be too costly for them to fix currently. How can organizations better toe that line? And I'll give a reference to that, the number of banks out there that still use SMS for MFA.
Right. So, great question. There is a, I guess for lack of a better term, you'll all get this, firewall that exists between the FBI and regulators. So when you provide information to the FBI, it is not incumbent upon us to then provide that information to regulators. The regulators have their own authorities. They can obtain the information that they need through their own means. We are not required to provide that to you. So if you work with us, you work with us. And that's how that works. So fear not.
It is a great question, though, and it's a reason why sometimes companies will engage legal counsel and have their lawyers interact with the FBI, to have some better preservation of attorney-client privilege in the communication. So the lawyers may talk to the company, the lawyer may talk to the FBI and try to better protect some of those communications because it can be very sensitive. And there have been cases where later in an investigation, there'll be requests for any and all reports and communications with the FBI, and they'll say that's not privileged, if it's not through perhaps outside counsel. So it's not always protected if it's seen as business communications. And there have been cases even where courts have required forensic reports to be produced even when they were at the direction of counsel, but at least having a lawyer in the middle can sometimes help guide those conversations for the company and protect the chain, with some attorney-client privilege for the communication. It's a great question.
That's a great point. Thank you for that. And just to add to that, the FBI, we have our own lawyers. We have our general counsel at every field office and then at the headquarters level as well. So your lawyers can talk to our lawyers and we can work all those things out.
But with that, you do want to make sure that it works well, because sometimes I can say this as a lawyer, it's like, oh no, now the lawyers are in the way. I mean, you want to make sure you have good, efficient communication, and especially if it's an incident response situation where time is of the essence, having someone who can help facilitate the conversations to protect it with privilege, but not make it more cumbersome that the lawyers spend 4 days in a room asking if they should call Joe and the money's gone to who knows where, as he said, the time of the essence kind of situation. I know your question was about proactively, but it also applies responsibly. Sir, yes.
Hello, Jody. My question is, usually the cyber attack comes from a compromised credential or from hardware and software vulnerability known. So the point is, for the second part, where we know there are softwares and the hardware is coming from nations that are hostile to our critical infrastructure, why are we allowing those type of components? Why don't we have a rigorous, how could I say, system to allow this type of situation to be, how could I say, minimized?
I'll try to answer that, but if you guys want to chime in. So I think the challenge is that and again, we're not regulators in the FBI, right? So I can only really kind of speak from, I guess, the limited experience I have in this. But from a supply chain issue or supply chain standpoint, there's manufacturers all over the world that manufacture items that people integrate into their networks. And I think it would be a challenging thing for a regulator or law enforcement organization to limit those options from a business, right? I think we've looked at, or we've talked about, I know, is there a way for us to review some of this and do some kind, like from a federal government standpoint, is there a way for us to like the FDA does for grading for food and that sort of a thing? But I think that the challenge for the federal government is not interfering with business process.
We have pretty, go ahead. So that we have abundant testing that we do, like of any application, irrespective of where it comes from, any software, right? So it goes through all of that thorough review, no matter, what country is the maker behind it. And so that kind of brings the standard up for, I think, everybody. And, a lot of them don't pass our very thorough testing. And so we don't use some of those products because of findings that we have, or the fact that the manufacturer won't fix it. They want to have those vulnerabilities. So we've seen that too.
Yeah, and I'll say that it's not like this isn't already happening. There's Huawei, there's all the effort around TikTok. There's also efforts now that banning of Russian and Chinese cars and automotive parts and things like that in the US. So it's not like there isn't some awareness of this. I think people are mostly targeting to things like this that are more sensitive. But the government has been increasingly aware that there are risks. And I think after the events that happened, in Lebanon, I think we're going to see even further increase in scrutiny about hardware supply chains and how things get into the hands of consumers.
I would also add, being a global company, we operate in 95 different countries, and there's a lot of restrictions on the products that we can operate and leverage in certain countries in which we have a presence. And so, we see it it's not just a US perspective, but we see that in countries in which we operate, where we have to have sometimes a different stack in order to apply to their regulations. So they don't like US based software or hardware. And so it becomes complicated when you're running a global operation and you want it to all be, similar alerting from these different systems that you can leverage, and you have kind of a disparity that happens there. It makes it very difficult. We don't want to have multiple SOCs because we have the presence in multiple companies or countries, but it can lead to that if we can't get some kind of parity associated with that, which is very difficult at the end, and it doesn't benefit the defenders, I would say.
Structures, we don't have anything at the moment, a rigorous way of looking at it.
I think from my experience, it's up to the individual organizations. We also have CISA, DHS, so if defense industrial base, if you're a cleared defense contractor, that sort of thing, there's other requirements in order to be a part of that, right? I can't speak to the exact reviews that take place for hardware that you're going to integrate into those systems. I don't know if Anne, you have better visibility into that, but.
Yeah, the US DIB, they have certain standards. So if you're a defense contractor, there's a set of criteria of systems that you can leverage for information that would pass, US government information would pass through those systems. So we have the credit cards for the US government, for the military. And so we have a standard of systems all the way down to middleware that can be leveraged based off of what is approved. And so those are different systems that are specifically running that client's information based off of those standards to that contract.
Other questions? Matt?
Yes, hi.
Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm Jay. Quick question. So as we're talking about public-private partnerships, one thing no one has mentioned yet is scale of operation. So if I have a small business that has 5 or 100 people, right? Like, how do they integrate into this process, especially when we're talking, let's say, the FBI, or, maybe we have 500. We're not talking about companies like Citi or AIG who have, cyber operations, but they're really just trying to get off the ground.
We do a lot with clients. A lot of our clients are small businesses, and so we do a lot to help our clients through the programs we have there to help share information sharing, cyber practices and other kinds of things. And then through organizations like ISACs, they have a ton of things they're doing for community banks and other kind of small institutions. So there's kind of engaging in industry groups can be one way. Engaging with your financial institution as a client can be kind of another way to get access to information that can help you as an individual business. It's a service to us. The practice that we have in cyber is something that we advertise and help our clients with as we can as well, to include very small institutions.
Yeah, I would echo that and say the ISACs are a fantastic place to go. There's one for every industry at this point, I think. So
In all sizes.
yeah, all sizes. So and the FBI's involved there as well. We have agents that in some cases are dedicated just to dealing with the ISACs. The other thing I would put out there as well is the web is a great place. So FBI.gov, CISA.gov, NSA.gov. We publish cybersecurity advisories, alerts, flash reports, private sector alerts, all these sorts of things on these pages. Generally, they're joint, notifications, and they're across all three websites. You can get them, but a lot of these contain, indicators of compromise and specific things that you can plug into your intrusion detection systems right away. So I would look there as well.
I think the question of scalability is a really great one. I've worked with Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, as well as very small, family business situations through for incident response and also for proactive. And little companies say, oh my gosh, it's so hard because we're so small and one person does marketing and IT and sales and budget and whatever. And then the big companies say, oh gosh, it's so hard because we're so big and all over the world. So the bottom line is it's just hard. But the same principles of prioritizing cybersecurity, leveraging the relationships, knowing who are the key people like Joe to call in an incident. And then also I do agree that there's a lot online in terms of what are the best practices in terms of NIST and CISA and what information is out there for incidents, and just trying to stay on top of that to some degree, I think is really important. And then for whatever sector, knowing who are your regulators as well, to the extent that companies are regulated for any size. It's hard either way, big and small, but good question.
Comes to public-private partnerships, you guys may have different answers on this, but how much of a role do you think voluntary cooperation plays versus regulation, like mandatory reporting for cyber incidents or ransomware attacks?
Yeah, I'll start.
We're all looking at each other like, well,
We talked a little bit about this with the question that Kelly gave me. So I would say that there are more ways than ever for companies to voluntarily work with the federal government through ISACs, through the NCFTA, through all these things that we kind of mentioned today, through just shooting me an email, right? There's all these things that exist. So I would say it has gotten tremendously better over the last several years. But, still, unfortunately, there's quite a bit that comes across my desk, which is forced, interactions where, unfortunately, people are calling me on their worst days and saying that they've got a problem that we now need to try to figure out. So I would love to, that's why thanks AIG and NYU for having me here today, because we have to do as much of this as possible. We have to get the message out. We have to meet the people, let you know how to get in touch with us so that we can kind of put the things in place, get you in the right places, get you talking to the right people so that we can have those relationships beforehand. I would also say a lot of times it might just be out of not knowing when and how to talk to the federal government, right? I get the question all the time, like, when should I actually call the FBI? Like, what is an incident that rises to the level of giving you a call? So we have to work through all that kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. And my answer to that question is always, it depends. Right? But to answer your question specifically, I would say we've gotten so much better. There's so much more of the interaction, from our standpoint of trying to be proactive rather than reactive. We've created more mechanisms for us to interact with the public. The public has taken advantage of that. So things have gotten way, way, way better.
I will just take a contrary perspective to his, from the perspective of SEC rule that came out last December. It's now mandating reporting of a cyber incident within 4 days of confirmation. That can mean a lot of different things. And I think as an industry that is regulated, heavily regulated, and someone that's practiced cyber operations now for 24 years, 4 days into an event, I don't have a lot of details that are confirmed. And so mandating reporting in such a quick fashion can really lead to what I would consider the US government's own DSL, data leak site, which is what it's become. We've actually seen that happen where companies are reporting to the SEC and it's publicly getting posted, and the threat actor is coming back and saying additional details around that victim and the reporting that they've done and clarifying that this victim's, it's worse than what they've reported and other kinds of things. So I think the government needs to be really careful with the goal of trying to help the know nothing investor with that rule, and that, the outcome that can happen with early reporting before, and a person like myself has an ability to lock that threat down. In a 4-day window, you don't always have that ability in some really complex cases. And so I worry about the federal government coming in and introducing a rule that doesn't look like it was thoroughly thought through before it was implemented. I'm hoping that there's revisions made to that, in the coming administrations, because it does have an impact to victims and these victims being re-victimized by other threat actors. As soon as you make a notification, you've just put a bullseye on that target associated with, oh, they have vulnerabilities. Let me see if I can find it as well. And so I worry about that, again, to smaller and medium-sized businesses that find themselves under the regulation of SEC. That could be very impactful. They might not have the sophistication of a large institution. And so I think there's some balance there that's missing in some of the regulation that's mandating reporting in such a quick amount of time in a public FOIA is concerning.
And there's also the problem that, a company may have to disclose within the 4 days, but they may not have had adequate time to tell other stakeholders, other
Exactly
partners
right.
or customers or clients also impacted, who then wouldn't have time to repair the problem. So it does, in the
Accelerates
name
all
of
that. Yeah.
good cybersecurity, could actually undermine cybersecurity.
Yep.
And sadly, it's not just the federal government, but the New York Division of Financial Services has reporting requirements if from paying a ransomware or if a ransomware attack. It's important to know what industry you're in, who are your regulators, what are the rules, and then if personal data is impacted, other requirements are triggered state by state.
I think it came from a good place, which is trying to get information to know nothing investors or just investors in general, right? And so, but the application associated with it is creating re-victimization. So I think that means we need to look back at the rule and see, public-private partnership industry engagement back into the rules can help make sure that we get to what is the outcome that SEC is trying to drive or the New York Fed is trying to drive. That's a collective, and that's where rulemaking can be really helpful in making sure that individual corporations are part of that rulemaking decisions and part of those ongoing conversations. So I know we're engaged, as a lot of other institutions are, and the SEC around that. Not passionate at all.
Matt, you get the last question.
Thank you guys.
We don't know what the question is.
Right, exactly. No, first of all, thank you all for coming tonight and joining us. Hopefully it's been a little bit of doom and gloom and all the bad things that are happening out there in the world. It's probably a question directly for Joe, but also happy to open up to others. What about, we talked about success earlier of private-public partnerships. Joe, I know obviously you've been involved in several investigations, obviously protect the innocent and the guilty, but any sharing a story of where there was like information shared, whether it's victim or just even stuff that we're seeing on our network sharing back to the intelligence community, back to the Bureau, where you guys are able to action that into something.
Yeah, a recent case that I took down, my team took down, you can Google Operation Medusa, 2023 May. So critical component of that case was working with organizations that were victimized by the FSB. And we wrote a 50-page paper. It's all declassified, so you can read all about it. But had we not had the cooperation that we received from victims, specifically here in the United States, we would not have been able to take the disruptive action that we took, which was to completely eliminate the most sophisticated malware operated by a nation state in the world. So, and we did that back in May. So that near and dear to my heart, that was a really good one. Thank you. It was a team effort, believe me. So that was great. There's been a couple others in the news. Not as big of a deal because I didn't have any. But there's been some good ones, ransomware getting money back, restitution and all that kind of a thing. So, yeah.
Roshan, thank you for kicking it off and for your support of these kinds of discussions. And Anne, Kelly, Joe, Justin, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight with us. And thank you all, audience, for the great questions. So Joel, to you, and thank you, panel.
Really wonderful discussion. Thank you all so much. A real quick shout out and thank you to all the teams at the NYU Center for Cybersecurity, Tandon Digital Learning, especially Nicole Howe for all their efforts in making today's event a huge success. And of course to AIG and their team for their ongoing sponsorship and contributions to today's event. We do greatly appreciate that. Lastly, I hope part of what you saw today was some of the vibrancy of the NYU cybersecurity community. And so for those of you who are students here and partners of ours, thank you. And for those of you who were just visiting or dropped in, I hope you'll take a look and think about joining part of our community, become a student, join us as an industry partner, participate in the Seesaw event in November, come participate in Judy's Women Leaders in Cybersecurity events, which are phenomenal and take place throughout the year. We would love to see you more involved in our community here. So again, thank you for joining us today. This really concludes our formal talks, and we look forward to continuing the discussion outside in the atrium at the networking reception. I will note that we've been asked that we do have to clear the auditorium rather quickly. So if you don't mind, we'll continue the conversation outside over drinks and food. Thank you.